Today we're going to look at sex-linked traits, and these are special traits that are only carried on a specific chromosome. And they're called sex-linked because they're actually only ever carried on the X chromosome, so they're linked to the female sex chromosome. So we can also think sex-linked as X-linked. There's also traits called sex-limited that you will learn about later on in biology, but for right now all we need to do is just look at traits that are carried on the X chromosome. One of the major traits that you may have heard of before is something called colorblindness, and this is actually carried on the X chromosome only. The Y chromosome doesn't have, remember it's shorter, doesn't have the space to carry all of these genes. So because of this, even though it's carried on the X chromosome, ironically, it's guys that end up getting these traits more often than girls. So a couple of things that we should probably clarify before we get too far into this. We've been talking about genes a lot. And an allele is a type of a gene. So think of it like that. So we've been talking about genes are the parts of a chromosome. So like every section of a section of DNA makes a gene, and a bunch of genes all together make a chromosome. And that's what actually has the genetic code. Now, there must be a gene that has the code for a certain type of hair color, whether it be dark or light, or having left-handedness versus right-handedness, color of your eyes, whatever. And we call those genes, that type of gene, we'll call it an allele. And you'll see what I mean. So we've been talking about homologous chromosomes quite a bit as well. So in this homologous pair of chromosomes, now you'll notice that they're not X's, they're just strands. This is because they haven't been duplicated. So if we see them as like an X, that's because we've copied the information. But let's say this chromosome here came from dad, and this chromosome here came from mom. So you have a maternal and a paternal chromosome, so one from mom and one from dad. Notice the genes, they both have genes, like in this case it's hair color. They both are carrying genes for the same trait, but they're not necessarily saying the same thing. Dad's is actually going to be saying dark hair because that's dominant over light hair. So homologous chromosomes are two chromosomes, one from mom, one from dad. It's a pair. They carry genes that code for the same traits, whether it be hair color, handedness, whatever, but they could be saying different things. They could have a different gene. And we call those genes, it's a better way to call it, we call it an allele. And it's just a form of a gene. So in hair color, the two genes that we had was one was dark hair and one was light. So the capital D is one allele, and the little d, is another allele. So that's just clarifying the difference between genes and alleles. After meiosis has happened, only one of these homologous chromosomes will actually go on into the sperm or the egg, because remember, we're going from diploid to haploid. So that means that the parent in this example will contribute either a dark hair dominant gene, or outside, we've been saying gene, but we should probably say allele, or a light hair allele. So if this person's making sperm or egg cells, one of these chromosomes will go in into one of the sperm cells, and the other one would go into another sperm cell. So half the sperm would have dark alleles, and half the sperm would have light alleles. And it's basically a flip of a coin, which is like what we did in our class with the pumpkin genetics, or if we do the baby making one, where we flip coins to give traits. That's really what it is. You're just flipping a coin to see which one goes where. And that's another way we get variation. Whether this offspring will have light or dark hair depends on whichever allele each parent gives. And that's what we were doing with Punnett squares. Now, sex-linked traits are special because they're carried on the sex chromosomes. Now, we're going to focus in on the X chromosome. You could have a sex-linked trait on the Y, I guess, but really the most common things that we're going to talk about, especially colorblindness and hemophilia and things like that, are carried on the X chromosome. And if you think about the male and female chromosomes, the X chromosome is much longer than the Y. So there's a bunch of genes that the Y is missing here. They're gone. And so this is a section of the X chromosome that could have genes that the Y chromosome can't block. So if you get that gene as a boy, you have that trait. For example, let's say this A was colorblindness. Well, let's even say it's a recessive trait. So let's say it's a little c. Well, you can't get a capital C to block it for normal vision. Same thing with hemophilia and those kinds of traits. So the presence of the Y chromosome causes, we would call it maleness, like being, like your sex is a male. The female determining chromosome does not carry the male genes, but the Y chromosome doesn't actually carry those extra genes. So a male has XY homologous chromosomes for our sex determination. Again, we talked about the difference between sex and gender. So this person here, this would be a karyotype of a human, and this human would be a male because if you look at the 23rd pair, you have an X chromosome, which is identified because it's really long, and the Y chromosome because it's really short. So this would be a male. If we're looking at this person, this would be a female because that last pair of chromosomes, that last homologous pair, are two longer chromosomes, so they're X chromosomes. There's no Y-based or male genes in this person, so they would be a female. Now, the X and Y chromosomes can carry genes for things that are not just, and notice it says gender in here. That is incorrect. It should say sex. Traits determined by genes on the X chromosome are called sex-linked. Some of these sex-linked traits will show up as a disorder, like hemophilia or colorblindness. And the genes for the disorders, you're typically recessive, and they're only ever found on the X chromosome. So the way we would show that, let's talk about normal vision and color blindness. So if we're talking about color blindness, normal vision is dominant. So I'm going to use N for normal and a little n, capital N for normal and a little n for color blindness. Now typically in any trait you need to have two genes to get that trait or to have a trait. But because these are carried on the X chromosomes, we're going to actually write it like this. So that would be X with a little n and X with a big N. So let's look at all the possibilities you could have. So let's talk about women, so girls. Girls could have X big N, X big N, and that would be a girl that's normal, has normal vision. They could have X with a big N and X with a little n, and that would be a girl who is also normal. They could also have X with the little n and X with the little n. This is colorblind. But if we're talking about a boy, boys are XY. So a boy would have X big N Y, and that would be normal vision. But a boy could also get X with a little n and Y, and this boy would have color blindness. So if you look, if there's a colorblind gene, if a woman has a colorblind gene, she could give that gene to her son. Notice there's nothing on the Y chromosome because this is an X-linked disorder, a sex-linked disorder. So it's only on the X chromosome. So if a boy gets this gene, this little n, this guy right here, there's no gene on the Y chromosome to block it. See, in this case, with a girl, if she gets a little n from her mom or even her dad, she can still get a capital N, a dominant gene, a normal vision gene to block it. So it's less likely, because there's more chances of this happening than this happening. So it's much more common in men than it is for women. So this is kind of how we would do sex-linked traits. So we only receive these from our mothers because it's only on the X chromosome. Girls can get, in order for a girl to get this sex-linked trait, her dad has to have it, and her mom at least has to be carrying it. So it's a lot less chance for a girl to get it. If we get an X chromosome with a sex-linked trait on it, we'll always have that trait, no matter whether it's dominant or recessive, because there's no gene or allele on the Y chromosome to block it or mask it. With girls, because you get X chromosomes from both mom and dad, you actually have to have both parents at least carrying that. So one parent actually has to have that disorder or that trait, and the mom at least has to be carrying it for the daughter to get it. But a mom who's a carrier will be giving that trait to half of her sons. There's a 50% chance of her giving colorblindness to her son. So if I go back a couple pages here just for a second, if we look at this mom, can't give any sex-linked traits to her kids. So she's only going to give normal vision genes to her boys or girls. This mom has a 50-50 chance of giving a normal gene or a colorblind gene. If you have a colorblind woman, 100% of her boys are going to be colorblind. So if your mom's colorblind, it's guaranteed that her sons will be colorblind. Not necessarily her girls, because if father's not colorblind, then the girls won't be. So if you have a colorblind woman and a colorblind man having children, it's pretty much guaranteed that all their kids will be colorblind. So going back to this, we were here. So if a female gets just one recessive linked allele, she can still block it with the allele from her other parent. So how does this go? So we're going to draw out a Punnett square for this, but this time, because it's on the X chromosome, on the sex chromosomes, we're going to include the sex chromosomes. So let's start off with the woman who is heterozygous for colorblindness. That means she's a carrier. So she's a woman. So I'm going to write down the X chromosomes because she's a woman. And she's heterozygous for colorblindness. So that means that she has a normal gene and a colorblind gene. And the man is XY, and he is normal. So he'll have a normal gene on his X chromosome, and there's nothing on the Y because it's only on the X. So now we're going to cross these two individuals. So let's do this. Let's put dad here and mom here. So now we're going to cross and see what we get. So X big N, X big N. X big N, Y. X big N, X little n. And X little n, Y. So now let's talk about the genotypes and phenotypes. So we get X big N, X big N. This is a girl, and she is normal vision. I'm just going to say normal. Then we also have X big N, X little n. This is also a girl, because it's two X chromosomes, but this girl is also normal. She's carrying the colorblind gene, but she's still normal because she has the dominant gene. Now we have X big N, Y. This is a boy, because it's XY, but this boy is normal. And this boy, X little n, Y, again, is a boy, but he is colorblind, because he has the colorblind gene, and there's no gene on the Y chromosome to block it. He can't get a dominant gene from his dad to give that, to block that colorblindness. So we want to talk about the percentages and stuff. If this couple has a boy, there's a 50-50 chance that that would be colorblind or normal vision, and neither parent would know. The male would know that he doesn't carry the gene because he has normal vision. But the mom wouldn't know that she has that gene. She's carrying that gene until she has a son who's colorblind, because she's just carrying it. She doesn't actually have the trait. She carries it, but she doesn't know she has it. So a heterozygous mother, that's this mom here, who doesn't have colorblindness, has a 50-50 chance of producing a colorblind son, and a 0 chance of producing a colorblind girl. And this is why it affects guys more than girls, because dad has to be colorblind for the girl, and mom at least has to be a carrier in order for a girl to get it. The homozygous mother, homozygous daughter, will not have any colorblind offspring because she always has normal vision. So this girl can't have any colorblind children because she doesn't have the colorblind gene. So another example. What kind of offspring will result from a colorblind father and a heterozygous normal mother? So again, go through and write down the two genotypes so we can know what we're crossing. I'm just going to back this up a touch. So colorblind father. So the dad is XY, and he's colorblind, so he has a little n. Heterozygous normal mother. So mom is XX, and she's heterozygous normal, so that means she's got one of each. So let's cross them again. So draw out our Punnett square. And dad will put here, mom will put here, and now we'll cross. So we got X capital N, X little n, X capital N, Y, X lowercase n, X lowercase n, X lowercase n, Y. So if we go through these genotypes again, now we have a dad who's colorblind, so let's see what the girls end up being. So the first girl is X big N, X little n. She's a girl who's normal. X little n is a girl who's colorblind. X big N Y, boy, normal. X little n y is a boy who's colorblind. Remember, these are genotypes and these are phenotypes. All right, so if you have a colorblind father and a woman who's carrying that gene, you basically have a 50-50 chance of having a colorblind kid. There's a 25% chance of having a colorblind girl and a 25% chance of having a colorblind boy. So if there's colorblind daughter, so now this girl here, let's say you get a girl that's colorblind, every son she has will be colorblind. And the reason why is because she only ever gives the colorblind genes. And if she ends up marrying and having children with a colorblind guy, the only genes that there would ever be are colorblind genes. So all of their children would be colorblind, even their girls. So the probability of that happening is pretty rare. It's not very common to see to know a girl or a woman who's colorblind. So that doesn't happen very, very often. It ends up more often when you have things like inbreeding. So if we actually saw this way back in history in Europe, when kings and queens were trying to keep their bloodlines pure, as they would say. And in doing so, the gene pool actually didn't have a chance to spread. So the genes that they were dealing with were very limited, and these traits ended up starting to appear more and more commonly. And so what actually happened was a lot of people started developing a bloodletting disorder called hemophilia, where basically your blood doesn't clot. And it basically started killing people. So they actually had to it became a problem, and they had to start bringing in other families into the mix so that their genetics would actually spread. So this is kind of the reason why they say that, you know, don't marry your cousin, don't marry your whatever, because this kind of thing can happen. And it took some time, but eventually these traits start becoming more and more common. A video that I'll post into the thing talks about dogs and what purebred dogs are like. And actually, purebred dogs, if you actually break it down, they are really actually inbred dogs. And that's actually why, you know, if you talk about certain breeds, you'll know that like golden retrievers are susceptible to cancer and hip problems and eye problems. And that's actually from the inbreeding, because they haven't been allowed to mix their traits with other breeds of dog. So it's a pretty interesting video. I'll post it after this one so you guys can see it.